Hello and welcome to AW360 Nasdaq Live. As the name implies, we are at the Nasdaq building here in Times Square in New York City with Advertising Week. My name is Richard Shea. I work with Advertising Week. Just a few weeks ago, the flagship Advertising Week was right here in the Nasdaq building and other buildings around Times Square. So you can always visit us at advertisingweek.com and get ready for the big trip to London in the spring for an Advertising Week Europe over there. Today we're doing Nasdaq Live, AW360. The topic is the new world of pharmaceutical marketing. We'll probably talk about the past world and the current world and the future world. Let's include all the worlds of pharmaceutical marketing in true Advertising Week fashion. We have a fantastic panel of experts, and I'll do just like we do the panels during the weeks. We'll let you guys introduce yourselves, and then we'll dive into the discussions. So Ann, if you'd like to start, maybe just a little thumbnail on who you are, what you do, what you've done.
Absolutely. Thank you, Rich. So my name is Ann Ruby, and I'm a healthcare marketer, focusing both on the professional marketing to physicians as well as directly to consumers. Been in the industry for over 15 years.
Jeff?
Hi, I'm Jeff Ross. I'm president of Wonderman Health in the U.S. and globally, and I've been working in the industry for over 20 years.
Hi, Brendan Gallagher. I work for Digitas Health. We are a full-service digital at the core marketing organization with offices in Philadelphia, New York, London, and San Francisco. And I've been dedicated to healthcare in the agency world for about 15 years.
Good deal. So thanks for joining us. And obviously healthcare, $3-4 trillion industry. Pharmaceuticals play a very big part of that. We'll talk about some of the trends, trend lines in the business and the category today. And we'll talk about some of the techniques you use to navigate in your marketing. But first, I might go a little looser and just say, you know, I guess it was direct-to-consumer loosened up a little in the late 90s. We're one of two, maybe three countries in the world that allow direct-to-consumer in pharmaceutical marketing. But you know, so in the past 15 or so years, you know, we as consumers, as just television watchers, a consumer of any media, we've seen the proliferation, let's say, of pharmaceutical advertising. Maybe, and I'll open this up to whomever wants to start and have a discussion, keep it loose. But where were we then, say 98, 2000, and you know, what's brought us to where we are today, and where are we today? Anybody?
Well, I guess I'll start. You know, in '97, when they did kind of lay the foundational rules for direct-to-consumer advertising, I think it went from a $300 million a year industry to, I think last year was around $5 billion in advertising, and I think that's still, I mean, we're only 2 decades into an entire industry being able to direct-to-consumer market. So I think the industry's been learning as we've been going. At Digitas Health, we have a mantra we kind of wear on our sleeve called helping, not selling. And what that means is we fundamentally believe that healthcare is different and that you need to market it different. It is different than selling a car or the tires for a car. Like you are selling medicines and services that help people live longer, happier lives. And so our belief is that if you help them make more confident healthcare decisions over time, you will, inspire loyalty or brand affinity and that
Sure.
sort of thing. And we work to do that. I think you know, a lot of pharma companies are still trying to find their way around the balance between heavy promotion of their products and the service that they can provide.
So how does one find their way? How does one do that?
It's a very fascinating craft to be able to balance the health and safety information with the promotional aspect of the product promotion. What I'd like to build upon what Brendan said is really what's happened over the last 20 years is just this huge empowerment of consumers and consumers' desire to find more and more information about their health. And I agree that in that context that consumers who do their research and they have empowered and informed conversations with their doctors, they make better decisions. So how that's evolved over the years, I think we've all seen some examples of companies that have done it really well and companies that have struggled with it. But finding that sort of balance between the required information and the promotion is a very creative and strategic task to accomplish.
Right.
Yeah, and I think just to build off of both of what you said is that the addition of the digital era within the direct-to-consumer. So what does that mean? Patients and consumers have gotten a lot more savvy. They're, you know, instead of the whole philosophy of maybe the push marketing, we're having as manufacturers, as me, marketer, working for a manufacturer, I have to listen more to the patient. Where does that patient fit into the whole continuum? And I think through advertising that can help me, but I also need to take a different concept and approach to it all.
Right.
And
Go ahead.
I was just going to build on that in the context of where it has evolved. And I think today we have the use of data, which really informs the conversations that we do have with patients and with doctors, which really becomes much more customized and personalized and tailored to sort of the information that people are actually looking for. So that's really a big evolution in how we...
Right.
Yeah.
But it's off birdshot, and you mentioned digital, and I think partly because people can go explore and learn and try to figure things out themselves, which maybe is good and bad. But of the channels, you think of traditional channels, print and TV, and now we got digital, mobile. How would you rank? I mean, maybe not rigidly rank, but the efficacy of each channel, or do they all have to work together? Can a campaign be done just on digital, or if budget's permitting, do you have to bring all channels in? Where is it in PR too?
I think we are still at a period of it's a mixed bag. It depends on your demographics. It depends on your overall marketing target. So for an example, you might be in an area where it's a chronic disease versus an acute disease. So then you start talking about it's a high science area like oncology. So that type of direct-to-patient, direct-to-consumer advertising is be a whole lot different than somebody, say, that is marketing an allergy medication. So there's different ramifications to each one of that. So to answer your question, it's a mixed bag, and I think it's up to us to look at the data and the marketing research and determine, based on our demographics, where do those pieces still fit in. I can tell you that some of the traditional forms and channels are still very effective. Print, depending on whether you're going to the consumer or the professional, is still very effective. But again, it's really who you're marketing to that makes up that bag of different options.
And the classic marketing or the classic consultant answer around it depends, right? I mean, even niche oncology products, we're seeing some people go to television these days just because it's a breakthrough category or something along those lines. I think, while television still commands the majority of the spend, right, just because of the nature of the channel, I think, omni-channel is really the new channel, right? So you see what happens when you dial down television or you dial down OLA, your search goes down. So they really do, I think you mentioned in the question, have to work in concert to be as effective as you can be.
But are you still discovering what works, or is it case by case?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, we're still discovering what works.
If we stop discovering, we'll be out of, us agency guys will be out of a job.
And for me, I mean, it's a learning step every piece of the way, because there's so many things we haven't even touched on in mobile, for an example, that we can be so innovative on and reach out to that patient in a totally different way we never reached out to before. It can be much more interactive.
And I would add to that we have data analytics now, which really gives us daily data on what's working and what's not working.
Real time.
And so you can dial up or you can dial down in a real time so that you can really
How do you apply the data? And off of that, you can tell me, answer the question I hate to ask you too, but did the HIPAA laws kind of contain you as well, where they wouldn't if you were selling tires or automobiles?
Right.
Yeah, I think from the data perspective, we all use data in three ways. We really use it to inform strategy and creative. We have the ability now to use data to really inform sort of the personalization and customization of content on a very one-to-one level, and we have data that really we leverage to sort of optimize performance. Specific to privacy, of course, yes, we have to abide by those laws and regulations around the world. I think what we see now is really an opportunity to get consumers to opt into communications. That's the basic sort of premise, that you're agreeing to have a conversation.
Is opt-in strong? Because let's say I had a cancer issue, I'm very likely to opt in if I have faith in the product, right?
Right. I mean, we have very strong opt-in on people who want to have a conversation and learn more about a product.
But those, I mean, to get an opt-in, you need to fundamentally shift your message away from the features and benefits of the product to the support mechanisms in place for you, either considering this product, making confident decisions, or taking this product successfully.
Right.
Agreed.
Or the next product.
Or the next product, right.
And with this information and this data explosion over the past 10 years, we're also able to not just sell our product at one point of time. We're able to continue with the patient and learn through the patient as they develop in their disease.
I mean, we have major data assets that more than we've ever had before. I mean, shopper data on people who buy migraine medicines and arthritis medications. So we have the ability to target in a very precise way.
When you say shopper data, just clarify.
People going to a drugstore and buying over-the-counter medications.
Right.
So we have that type of data available that allows us to very precisely target individuals that we want to engage with.
And capturing it, what's the most effective way to capture the data and build your data?
Just shopper consumer data that's driven from consumer shopping.
Yeah, I think
even just affinity programs.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and some of the data sources aren't that different than almost any other industry, right? I mean, you could still use places like Axiom to de-identify. You could still use ComScore for digital behaviors. You can still use RentTrack for TV. XAD for mobile. I mean, so there's a plethora of sources out there. I think when you mentioned HIPAA earlier, it's almost a self-policing industry that is guiding the goalposts of what you can and can't do. So, for instance, people like companies like Google actually give you guidelines around retargeting and what you are allowed to use as a retargeting metric, right? So things like disease states and personally identifiable healthcare information cannot be used to retarget advertisement. It's not necessarily HIPAA that says that, but it's the publishers that are self-policing that, and I think that's a good thing.
Yeah.
Does that present a challenge? Because forgive me, and I'm completely layperson, not conversant. Drugs have a lifetime. They improve. They come out with 2.0, right? Just like a software package. You have to then reintroduce the drug entirely, or can you retarget, or what challenges do you face there? Because I mean, heck, Flonase went from a prescription drug, and now can buy it anywhere. So, but as drugs evolve, do you have to bring them fully back out to the market, or can you use some of your data?
I think
If you have permission from consumers that they agree to having a conversation about products and services that would be of interest with them, yes, you can do that. But I think that when you go out and target for the first time, you have to get permission.
Right.
And there were actually, I think, 3 questions in your question there. I mean, there's 3 scenarios that could happen. One is you go LOE, right? You lose your patent exclusivity and you're done. There's the switch to OTC, like in Flonase's case or Nexium's case. And then there's the reformulation, which is adding on like extended release or a different
Which is not uncommon, right?
Right, it's just not uncommon at all. But all 3 of those have very different marketing strategies.
I mean, people would accuse it. There's a lot of reformulation, right?
Right, exactly.
I think a good example.
Or do they just fully rebrand? I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I mean, the Flonase is a good example. Just sort of that as a launch was very, very successful. RX to OTC conversion, and I think when you talk about what sort of channels we use there, I've really seen the convergence of digital really more so than ever with a campaign like that.
Right, and to sustain the life of sustain its success. Yeah.
And what we're finding too is like you're not just advertising too, like for a lot of these brands are generating user-generated content that they're not only publishing content, but they're getting content from their customers.
And then there's additional data that comes along that makes a product even have additional indications. So how do you educate the consumer on that versus when you're educating another professional or physician? So it's a different channel you're doing that in because it's highly scientific. So how do you get that to the consumer? And that can really adjust how you market and advertise.
How do you inform? Are you talking? Excuse me.
Oh, how do you market and advertise as well as inform and educate?
Right, and even based on the success of a launch, for instance, you could cement something as effective on one thing, and then all of a sudden you learn it's effective on something else, and you have to almost go away from Xerox means copying to Xerox means.
And that happens with additional indications within different therapeutic areas.
Right.
So you could have a product that you launch and get indicated for rare disease, and then all of a sudden you get an indication for oncology or some type of cancer medication. So it's a different therapeutic area too.
Right. Yeah, they're unique therapeutic categories which are not necessarily going to apply to the same individual.
Or the same audience.
They're different patient types.
Yeah. So you have patients and you have consumers and you have doctors in the field. So there's a few different groups you have to speak to through different media.
Well, I think the way media is splintered today, we're all consumers, whether our roles in lives as consumers or healthcare professionals, or whether we happen to be a patient at that moment in our lives, being as relevant as possible to that consumer of information, whether it's a doctor trying to make a decision on an oncology drug, or whether it's a patient trying to decide whether that commercial they just saw is worth its weight.
Right.
Delivering the right message at the right time I think is the key there, despite the segments or despite the indication rollout.
And and what's interesting too is we have a lot of gatekeepers in this process. So you have consumers can go talk to their doctors, but doctors in our communications with healthcare professionals, we want to make sure that we're synergizing that message, and you're informing a conversation with the doctor, and then you have payers. Just because somebody goes and asks for a particular drug and they might get a prescription, it may not be reimbursed from a payer. So we have a very important challenge to make sure that we're aligning all of the key stakeholders in this conversation to assure that it's productive.
And I think as time goes by, and your original question about the evolution is the payer, especially in these higher priced premium drugs, have become more of a stakeholder than ever before, with a lot of pathways that are developed and formularies that are developed. So that's a big consideration to take into the whole advertising of it all.
Yeah.
It's a huge consideration.
Right.
So,
Right.
I mean, it will fundamentally change the way we market because of it, because the power has shifted from a typically autonomous paternal HCP to a system that is in the business of achieving the triple aim, essentially.
And determining what drugs people get.
Right.
And the medical conferences, the top 3 subjects are the value and pricing of pharmaceuticals. So.
And you've got the conversation shifting too, because you see the emergence of retail more than ever, where people are going to their local pharmacy and getting medical care or urgent care. So that conversation is really shifting significantly.
That's going to be a big thing, I think, on the horizon, right? Yeah. So where Walmart is the hospital or the urgent care place, right? And that's where I'm going for milk and for
and your medicine.
Vision and medicine. All right, let me go back. So, guys, I mentioned I'm a layperson in this industry. So what we see, and talk a little bit about transparency. Not transparency that people want to regulate you and see how much the pharma companies are spending in R&D and actually to market, what are they spending to market drugs. More like just what you have to, how transparent you have to be, or the term I guess is disclaimers. And I think a lot of people for years it's been fun, or it's been a point of humor for a lot of people, the disclaimers you hear in an advertisement. So I went online and I found some that I liked. So here goes. Tell your doctor if you have changes in behavior or thoughts of suicide. Side effects include swelling of the face, mouth, lips, gums, tongue, throat, and neck. Some patients can have allergic or serious skin reactions, some of which can be life-threatening. Severe liver problems, some fatal, were reported. And this is my favorite, not to be snarky or too glib. My favorite. For certain patients, this medication's benefits outweigh the risk. For certain patients, this benefits. I mean, that's like saying for some car purchasers, some car purchasers like this, or some beer drinkers didn't get in a fight after drinking our beer. Like nobody, for instance, automotive, you can do a 30 or 15-second spot. You don't have a big disclaimer. You might have to say that's a professional driving, right? Or don't do this. But in beer advertisements, you just say, I'm the guy, I'm the most interesting man in the world. Go buy my beer. Beer causes liver problems, I assume, and cars cause accidents and death. So it's a hurdle, right? And it seems like an undue burden. I guess 2 things. Creatively, how do you get around that? Right. And then spend-wise, does it impact the budget? I'm guessing it does. Well, I mean, you can do a 30-second car spot. You have to do a minute or plus on a if you're going to have a 30 seconds of Nexium disclaimers,
I mean, the genesis of this was the guideline shift where to allow people to go on TV and magazines and promote their medications that they...
Which we're lucky to do because not many countries can do this, right?
That they have to agree to this sort of like sharing the risk benefits. And it's high stakes. And so companies go more typically, they'll pre-clear that sort of fair balance information with the FDA to get approval to proceed. So it's... but from a creative perspective, it is a interesting challenge that you never want to go over. Typically, like for a 30-second commercial, you don't want 20 seconds of the commercial to be about the risk and benefits, and so you have 60-second TV commercials where you don't want it to be over
VO and 30. A little bottom third,
Correct,
right?
Correct. So but it's proven to be very, very effective at spurring very objective conversations between doctors and their patients.
And it goes back to health is different. Right? I mean, very few other products need to have the amount of rigor around clinical data before they are allowed to even come to market. If they did, you'd have people like Samsung saying this phone may explode,
right?
Or Toyota saying these airbags
this phone
may
does
deploy.
explode,
right? Exactly.
Just FYI.
But there is a rigor to this industry that other industries don't have, and that was the value exchange. That was the deal that said, okay, we'll allow you to direct-to-consumer advertise, but in exchange, you need to balance all the good with the bad.
But Ann, is there an intimacy I mean, and this, so it's easy for me to, I don't mean to make fun of, you know, but if I need a drug, I'll listen to that because if the advertisement resonates with me and I need XYZ remedy, I'm going to put that aside, and you know, because there's an intimacy between, and it almost goes like you're buying a 30 for, you know, 10 million people are watching the Jets game, and maybe only 300,000 or 200,000 are really your target, maybe not even. But does the intimacy sort of, does the consumer, it's easy to look beyond that if they're actually in the market for something like that.
Well, if they're actually in the market for something, I think that naturally creates the intimacy, right? And it's up to us, the manufacturer, who I work with in terms of third-party vendors and agencies, to really come up with as much about the creative as possible while still following the FDA guidelines that we have put in place. And also to take the advertising and encourage patients that it is resonating with to go talk to their doctor about it and not just assume that this is the right medication. Encourage the patient and the physician relationship and discussion.
And when you
I think that's responsible,
right.
direct-to-patient
Sure.
consumer advertising, and that's what we have to keep in mind.
And you see the volume of these sorts of advertising, and predominantly because it works, because it generates interest, it educates people about disease conditions sometimes that they've never talked to their doctor about, and so it informs them to have a conversation, and you have the gatekeepers in place to make sure that it's done in a respectful and productive way.
And at the end of the day, we are raising awareness. I mean, we get hit on a lot because of the industry, but we're raising awareness to a disease they might not even know they have.
At the end of the day, it's math, right? I mean, to your data question earlier, like, yes, the spend is bigger because the spots have to be longer in order to get the right message with the right balance. But there's data that says if you run it, you'll get this amount of people in the funnel, which then becomes just a classic marketing mix challenge.
Sure. And perhaps there's channels that are, you know, coming up that may be a little more affordable. Yeah. And so you can lean a little bit more on those.
And potentially more
truncate your
effective.
budget a tad.
Right.
And I think the other interesting thing too is just the whole sort of practice of medicine is shifting, and that you have, with medical devices now, you can detect body biorhythms that tell you, predict like Parkinson's episodes or bipolar or schizophrenia. So you have this sort of shift, and that now it's not just going to be, you have a warning that you have a medical condition that you need to address. So that's really shifting the dynamics.
So you mentioned that you said we get hit on a little bit, and I think the industry does, and lately it seems to, for the past 12 or 16, 18 months, it's been a little bit heavy with was it Turing's Darapram? I mean, it's a specialty drug. It's a ridiculous increase, you know, 5,000% increase in price, but it really got a lot of eyeballs, a lot of attention. You know, the AMA is saying, you know, we really shouldn't do direct-to-consumer in this country because it raises the price of drugs and devices. Hillary Clinton on the trail said, you know, she's going to take a real close look at, you know, the tax implications. Can Big Pharma get some breaks on their advertising? Is that, you know, I think a lot of that came from the Darapram thing. I think extended its life with Mylan and EpiPens, and that really hit a big. My kid needs an EpiPen, and $600 for two is impactful, and they took a bad ride on that. I mean, there's a little tumult in the industry. The U.S. and New Zealand, and you mentioned maybe Bangladesh, you can do direct-to-consumer on pharma, and South Korea. But so it's a precious thing that we have, you can think, and I think I totally concur that it's good to educate consumers of what's out there. Are these challenges real? How are you going to navigate the challenges, or is it more of a PR thing and not so much in the...
So I think there's two questions in there. So one is, do we need to take a look at the market forces that allow people to behave in certain ways?
Sure.
So you look up the definition of a CEO, maximize shareholder value, period,
Right.
full stop. So you could argue that some of these people did that, and is that right? Then there's the other part of the question, which is somehow marketing and advertising driving up the cost of healthcare? And I just think that's absolutely not the case. I mean, the schism between life expectancy and healthcare expenditures in this country started around 1980, not around 1997 when direct-to-consumer came out. So to say that this, you know, the $5 billion that was spent in advertising is somehow raising the trillions number that you mentioned earlier, I think just the math doesn't work out.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, when you look at some of the benefits that products do when you do raise awareness, it's a lot of times those benefits could be keeping people out of the hospital. So you could say, hey, exactly, and you know, so you're getting 50% less hospital admissions based on the fact of this product. So when you're actually marketing that, how is that increasing to the overall healthcare cost?
And I think on balance, when you look at a lot of the companies that manufacture these products, their mission and their vision is really to improve patient health and quality of life, and that's a very positive thing.
All right.
We do need to look at it though. So I mean, as we enter this, the third decade of direct-to-consumer advertising, right? Or we're finishing out the second one, and you do look at stats like Chileans live longer, like much longer than we do, and spend 5 times less on healthcare than we do. I think it is on us as an industry to look at it and say, are we making the right calls? Are we doing the right things in our marketing and advertising to actually help? Which the core problem, which I think is the divisiveness in access, right? It's the life expectancy versus expenditure thing is skewed because of that.
Well, great, because that was gonna be my last question, which
Sorry.
is where we started with where were we, and that's part of where we're going, right? So it was great to have you, Ann, Jeff, and Brendan. Thanks for taking the time for Advertising
Rich.
Week and AW360 here at Nasdaq. I'm Rich Shea. Thanks for watching.